I think, Leena ma'am, we can start.
Yes, Raman. Absolutely. Yeah. So shall I take over straight away?
Sure, ma'am, sure.
Yeah.
All of them mostly knows about the design village, so they don't need any
Okay.
introduction.
Right. Uh, okay, so let me share my screen and I just hope this works. Yes. Can you see it moving?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
Slide mode. If it doesn't change, then I'll go back to this mode. Trying a slide. Now, is it moving for everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
It
ma'am.
is. Okay, we are sorted. Hi, I'm Leena, and I'm one of the, I think, probably the oldest teacher in TDV, and I have been there ever since TDV was conceptualized, and then, of course, we moved into a building and then another building and so on and so forth. So I think I like to say that I've grown old with TDV. Today, I think what I want to do is to remove this whole idea of phobia of an exam, particularly the TDV exam, and try to move from a phobia phase to a philia phase. So those of you who have studied a little bit of biology sometime in 8th, 9th, if not later, would know that philia is a love for something. So even if it's not a love for it, but at least something that you look forward to, and it's not something that you fear or something that makes you nervous or anxious, as a result of which you don't enjoy it and you never think of an exam as an experience. So we are at TDV, we want to change that perception. And it doesn't mean it's an easy exam. It only means that the challenge is something to be looking forward to. It's a lot of fun. And it also is very satisfying when you have met a challenge successfully. So you see, I'm the chief examiner. So am I scary? No, I mean, I don't think I by any yardstick of measurement. So clearly I wouldn't set a scary paper. I wouldn't be involved in anything to do with a scary paper. So first myth that I want everybody to remove from your mindset is that it's not a conventional exam. Okay. So what do I mean by conventional exam? I mean, of course, not just the school exam, what kind of exams you're used to, whichever board you're writing, but exams as in competitive exams that you write for maybe a medical entrance or an engineering. So in a conventional exam, it's really about competing with others. Okay. And in such an exam, I think beyond a certain point, it's not so much about how you perform. How others perform transcends how you perform on that particular day. And so when you write such an exam, you somehow feel you're not totally in control of your destiny. But with us, you absolutely compete only with yourself. And this is a paradigm, a kind of a principle we follow even after you get admission to TDB. So in the 4 years journey of the design education and 2 years if you're doing a master's program, if you produce your best, you will automatically compete with others. So we just make sure that you do your best and you set your pace and the level to which you want to reach, and that's all there is. And we believe that there's enough place in the world for everybody to not only survive but to actually flourish and thrive. And in a country like India, and in a developing country like India, there are even more possibilities, opportunities, and options for what you would like to do. So there is no competition. It's really about putting forward your best. And I think the only word I can think of which is similar to competition would be competence. So try to develop your competence, and you're pretty much half the battle is over. Then it's not a tool for us to be judgmental. So it's not about telling you, Acha, you don't know this, but we know this. Obviously, we know more, and that's why we are on this side. And you don't know because that's why you're going to come to college. If you knew everything, then you wouldn't need to go to college in the first place. So we absolutely do not advocate a behavior like judges, delivering a verdict and saying order, order. We do not believe that we have the audacity to claim that kind of a position. We just want that it should be something where we are talking to each other, and in some way even if we are judging, you are judging us as much as we're judging you. So at best, we are on an equal platform. Yeah. And it's also for us at TDV, it's not about taking the cream de la cream and the best, and of course then producing the best as products that come out of the college, like the IITs, for instance. For us, it's an equally exciting challenge to be able to mold anybody, just anybody from any background who has a genuine inkling for being a designer. And our job is to moderate or direct or mold that personality into becoming a designer and becoming more evolved than when he, she, or they came to us in the beginning. And also, we love or we thrive on multiple templates of students, people who come from different kinds of backgrounds, from different kinds of cultural, regional backgrounds, from different language backgrounds, from different kind of privileged backgrounds, so that we have this kind of a heterogeneity in our student community, and we are able to mold different kinds of designers who think differently because of their conditioning. And then the third thing is that it's not usually like in other exams about knowledge or skills, because knowledge, especially the knowledge which is related to memory. So I'll give you a small example. I also, about maybe 7-8 years back, I went for an interview to a very, very prestigious university. And I won't name the university, but it was something that I was really looking forward to a job over there, and as a visiting faculty. And although I'd applied in the Department of Architecture and Acoustics, it's called, there were about 10 civil engineers sitting on the panel, and it was an interview. And they asked me the first question. I'd already had about 8 years of experience, and I was really raring to, be part of that community. And then the first question they asked me was, Taj Mahal kidhar hai? I was totally taken off guard. I can't tell you, it really shook me up, because that was, I mean, not remotely had I thought that that would be the question. And then my mind started thinking, is it a trap? Because obviously they would ask that to somebody who's been teaching history of architecture for 8 years. And this is, and in architecture school. But then I thought maybe ये लोग कोई नकली वाला कहीं बांग्लादेश में चाइना में बना है, maybe is that the one? So I said असली or नकली, and they just stared at me and they said of course असली. I said आगरा में, and they gave me a very good. And then asked me किसने बनाया. Then the next question of कितने लोगों ने बनाया, and some GK test out of रट्टा मारो. I think that it took नहीं कितने ही साल लगे, 22 years somewhere I read. Then they asked me how many people built it. I'm like, okay, do you want it 1 year or do you want it at the overall like 22 years? I was buying time because I frankly didn't know. And they said, nahi, kuch bhi bol do. So I said, well, couple of million people, because it was such an absurd question. Then they asked me a bummer saying, who's the architect of that building? And I was like, oh my God, I should know this really. But somehow, I mean, it was never important to me who built it. So I was thinking in a flash of a second, oh, this was built before Renaissance. Renaissance was when there was a professional architect. It's, the term architect came. So maybe there was no architect, and maybe, so I said there was no architect very confidently. There was a master craftsman. Apparently I was wrong. Not only was there one architect, there were 4 architects, and there was a competition and all that. And by then I was really, irritated. So I told them, sir, I mean, apologies, but I think I'm in the wrong place. I just don't belong here. They said, why? I said, because this is not the line of questioning that I really expected. So obviously, it's not nice to tell an examiner that. And they said, okay, what do you think we should ask? So they threw the ball back in my court. I said, I came prepared for things like, how is your teaching experience been? What subjects do you like to teach? How do you bring your practice experience into academics? What kind of problems do you have with this generation? How do they irritate you? How do they excite you? All kinds of things. And you were asking me these kind of questions. I said, oh no, but what's the problem with these questions? I said, why would they come to my class to know who built the Taj Mahal, how many people built it, how many years they took? They can sit at home and it's at a click of a button, or now a touch of a screen. If I have to be teaching, I have to do something differently. I have to inspire. I have to give them a direction I have to channelize their thoughts. I have to help them to build multiple perspectives and so on and so forth. And so anyway, I walked away and I came back, and my staff in the office was waiting for me because they said, hey, Roj, ye ma'am, hamari watt lagati hai. Now today she's gone for an interview. So they're like, how was it, ma'am? How was it? I said, it was so bad. I've never had such a bad interview in my life. I am not going to get this job. And promptly next day, I got the job. So, I mean, I'm trying to tell you that this kind of an exam where they test you on memory or knowledge that is based on memory is become irrelevant now, because you have access to mechanisms that allow you, and you don't really need to know these things. It was important at a time when we didn't have access to these kind of mechanisms. So I think that is again something that you need to knock off, that knowledge per se is not of much use, not in the entrance exam, not even as a student of TDV, because in itself it is like achar dalna. It's what you do with knowledge, what we call as awareness, if at all. Yes, very much a pillar of our foundation, what we call of our philosophy, and I'll come to that. So these are the things that, you know, clearly we don't. Then the question is, okay, what do we then do? So the entrance exam is really like a peep into what I call, or a small little window, a glimpse into the world of design education at TDV. So it gives you a chance through the exam to have a vague understanding of who we are, where we come from, why we do what we do, how do we carry out our education, and how do all these things get stitched together through some kind of a vision or a narrative. So if I see the illustration on the left side, if you see, you know, somebody is weaving a very beautiful tapestry. Now, what is already there is what potential you have. And then we are those threads. And if we continue weaving together, we are going to reach and end that beautiful tapestry. And that is exactly what we're looking at. We are looking at your potential to become who you already partially are, and therefore who you want to be. And I think for us, the entrance exam is an interface with all the bache who are going to become our bache, hamare bache. Okay, so it's that kind of an emotion with which we not only design the curriculum, but also design the entrance exam. And it's also, like I said, as much about you choosing us as we choosing you. And why? Because when we teach, we have a vision for teaching, and we want that if students grasp or they understand and they value what we are giving, we are very happy. So it's not just about a salary for us, it's also about trying to mold lives and to change the career paths and so on and so forth. So it's very satisfying for us. And for you, you have a perception of what you want to be, and you know where you want to go from being a designer further in life. You need to be sure that what we are giving is what you're looking at. Okay, so I think that is what the entrance exam fundamentally is talking about, us seeking alignment with one another. And it's very important because 4 years is a long time. We pretty much live together. You know, we have such an intense and a long 4 year or even a 2 year relationship in a master's. And most of the time, almost 99% of the times, that relationship continues for life. Okay, that's how at least we envisage it. So if that's the kind of thing, we would like it to be very, very seamless, a very happy one where we might agree to disagree, but we do not lose mutual respect and trust of each other. And that is what we are looking at. Okay. And so that is one major paradigm, is that we are only looking at the potential of what we think you should be as a designer, and that also in the context of what challenges India has or the world has in through the design field. It's about your aspirations, and it's about how inspired you are and how eventually then you will go to inspire other people. So for instance, I'll take the example of this young boy who came from a very small village in Haryana to us for a master's program. And he was carrying a sanduk, you know, a metal kind of a chest, which had lots of little embroidery pieces of women from his women had made from his village. And he came and he was wearing a kurta pajama which he had himself stitched. He was a fashion student, and he said, you know, I want to take this to the world, and I want to also give a voice to these women. They go on making these embroideries and they keep them in the sanduk, and so I want to open this sanduk metaphorically and literally. So this is what I want. Please give me the exposure. Please give me the necessary direction on how I should take this to the world stage, because this is what I want to do in my life. And there was another colleague of mine, a very senior colleague, and we were like, this guy just has to be with us. And you will not believe, just recently, a project that he calls FAG, it's made of all the waste that comes out of salvage. So when you have these long reams of cloth, to straighten it from the edges, they cut it, and that's called a salvage. So from salvage, he taught the women of his village to weave these beautiful tapestries, and they can be used as daris, they can be used as even installations. And it got selected for a lost graduation show project in Milan. It was the only project, other than one more project from NID, that represented the aspirations of 1 billion Indians. So they were the only two projects from India. And I think he has gone places. And that is what we want, that if you're an inspired person, someday, you will end up inspiring others. And that is something that we want to nurture very actively in TDV. Then we look at it as a conversation, and this conversation is not only limited to the entrance exam, it's also in our classroom spaces. So this is a picture of a class of mine, and we were doing a subject called Indian context and India and the world. We're trying to decode this context where most of us will be operating in the next several decades of our life as a designer. So we need to understand how to decode India. It's a very, very big and a very diverse country. So there is one exercise we do, which is called Chai Pe Chintan. So Chai Pe Charcha is Prime Minister Modi's, Chai Pe Chintan is my take on it. And I think without Chintan, there can't be Charcha. So we do a lot of introspection on how a cup of tea is anything but a cup of tea. So it's a correlative exercise. And so these students, what they did, they got this chai from a shop tea stall next door, and they got these cups, and they got a lot of snacks, and they went all over the campus, chai, selling chai, giving chai rather, not selling. And all of us had this entire class sitting and sipping tea and having a variety of those biscuits and other snacks which we traditionally have with tea. And I think that is why even today they remember this class and they say, ma'am, that was such a memorable experience. So similarly, we want that you should enjoy the experience of the exam, and also you should try and, it should be a memory, a milestone, even if you don't take admission in TDV. We are okay with it, but we just want to leave you with this this event that sometime in life you remember and say, hey, that was like very quirky, it was fun, and it was something different, or whatever adjective you might choose to give. Then we have this whole idea of what we call as lightness in friction. So this is Julian. He comes from Bois Boucher, which is a design retreat that we are very closely associated with in our France campus. And he came to do a workshop with our students. So they just went around the streets collecting things that were lying on the road, pieces of broken bottles and corks and leaves. And it was actually just garbage lying around. And then they brought it all back and they designed something called a modern cutlery. Now, the learning from this was very profound. So when we say lightness and friction, we mean that there can be a lot of very, very critical learning that can come out of fun exercises, enjoyable exercises. And that's how we operate in TDV. Even though design is a very, very serious and a very responsible profession, there is no harm in having a little bit of that playfulness, a little bit of that fun, and almost a little bit of, an element of almost craziness and madness that we can bring to our design. And I think that, again, brings in that uniqueness quotient to not just the education part of it, but also then transmitted to the practice of design. So this is again an ingredient of the exam, which I hope all of you get, because it's not about it being easy. It's about it being challenging, but challenging in a fun way, and where you actually tell us a lot many things about yourself, and we actually get to know you inside out. But it's just that we don't have to make a big brouhaha about it. It's just done in a very light-hearted fashion. That's all. Okay, now my question to all of you is, so I've been speaking for last 10 minutes now. So I want to ask you guys and girls, how do you see yourselves 40 years from now? Like, all of us dream, right? We all have dreams, and these are not those dreams as kids. You ask any kid, what do you want to be? I want to be an astronaut. Nobody goes to Mars, and nobody really ends up being in NASA or anything, and they probably become software engineers. But aspirations are different now that you are, on the threshold of actually making that transition from school to higher education, and you're going to have to choose what kind of a mechanism for a livelihood and a larger, what do you say, time of your life that it's going to consume. Obviously you will have aspirations which are more realistic dreams, the ones that you see during the daytime. Pure hosho awaz mein. So how do you guys see yourselves 30 40 years from now? So maybe when you are, let's say, in your 50s, that is my age. See, our professors asked us this question, and we had such idealistic and utopian ideas, and it's really touching to remember that they told us, like, thoda sa come down, but don't lose your idealism. And there are so many of us still hanging on, desperately hanging on to many of those ideas that we set out with. So that's why I want to give you the opportunity to ask you, well, where do you see yourselves 40 years from now? 30 years from now. Let's make it 30. Yes? Anybody? Come on, say, you can say, I want to be Elon Musk. Yes, you can. Elon Musk just became the richest man on earth, and I believe he has his income. He can buy 4 car companies and some 6 countries. And I think it's amazing that somebody can buy a country. So yeah, inspiring guy. Yes?
Ma'am, I don't see myself where like Elon Musk is right now,
Uh-huh.
but at least I look at myself with a self-satisfying house, like where I can stay and be like, yeah, this is what I wanted, like with amazing interior and a nice place to like surround myself with. Then at least one of my favorite cars, a luxurious one.
Okay.
At least this much is what I look myself with.
Yeah,
And a
it's
good education background. Like
super.
sure.
So it's good to know what is the the least that you can achieve in life. That means the sky is the limit on the other side. Okay, that's a good strategy. That is, I will not go below this. I will at least have this. So maybe somebody said, I'm going to at least climb the Everest, and then I might climb 30 other mountains. So it's good to have a really high bar for oneself. And yes, a shelter is a very, very primordial need for all of us. And the Indian mindset is really about owning your own house. And a house is not just a shelter, really. It is a place where, you it has memories, it develops relationships. I mean, there's so much that a house does. So yes, well done. Anybody else? And it is a nightmare to build a house in India for yourself, huh? Really.
Old and
And
relaxing.
Ma'am,
Huh?
now it is, which is why this has become a dream
yes,
40 years later.
yes, absolutely. Anyone else?
Ma'am, I just want to be successful. I want to travel the whole world and then settle at a beautiful country with a mansion and a luxurious lifestyle.
All right. So great. So travel. I'll pick the keyword here is travel. And I think as a designer, travel is it's almost food for thought. People who travel, I mean, anyway, you travel backpacker style, you want to travel 5-star travel, but travel is something that always keeps you hungry for more ideas and newer ways of doing things, and also develops this whole idea of universal, what we call as universal design. Because once you travel, you see other people like you, people from other regions of the country, if you're traveling within the country, or if you go outside, people from different cultural backgrounds, different countries, and you say, hey, well, both of us seem to want to have food, both of us want hygiene, both of us want shelter, both of us won't want crime against women or vulnerable populations. So there is something at a very base level that unites all human species, and that is a beautiful domain called universal design, which will be probably become more and more important in the future, where the world is, because the world is shrinking and is becoming more connected than before. So great, Udita. Anyone else?
Ma'am, I mean, ma'am, for me, for next 10 to 20 years, I have to, ma'am, I will work very hard and be then, I mean, then in next 30 years, I don't have to be forced to work. And then I'll travel and meet different people, talk to them, have their experience. I have to live in different experiences.
Nice. So you, well, actually I do that, but I didn't do it like 20 plus 30. I do it like I work through the year, and then I sort of travel for 15 days in the year, somewhere out of the country, somewhere I have to go, and I really then splurge and I really save for the rest of the year. So maybe, you could sort of balance it in a way that both of them pretty much go simultaneously. So initially, it may not be every year. It was probably once in 4 years because you could never really save money. You have so many responsibilities. And then as you reach that 30 wala portion, you will probably travel 3 times a year. So the frequency might differ, but it would be great if you can always travel in your life, because again, it's something that keeps you going. It is something that feeds you, gives you that energy to deal with your Rosemarra issues. So it's an
Yes.
inspiration in a way. Yeah, beautiful. Anyone else?
Ma'am, for me,
Mhm.
I'm not sure if I'll be like Elon Musk or Mr.
Oh,
Ambani.
it's just an example. Okay.
I cannot predict the future, but I definitely want to see myself settled and independent, living my life how I want it to be, and enjoy my life to the fullest in my 30s and 40s.
Nice. So living your life to the fullest is like what we call as self-actualization. Yeah. But then as you start understanding, what kind of responsibilities you have, you would probably also look at not only enjoying your own life, but also helping others enjoy their lives. So what I was trying to really get at by asking you how you see yourself 40 years or 30 years down the line is that we at TDV, we don't look at the education and therefore by default the entrance exam as something that enables us to have a vision for a job or a package or a placement. So these are all terms which we find are very, ordinary. Okay, we are looking at fundamentally education, design education that must have a validity, a significance for the next 40 to 50 years at the very least. Because most designers, in fact, they actually bloom and they blossom and they get wiser as they get older, and some of their best work is oftentimes in later years. So if you assume that you start working at 25, you would definitely be active even when you're 75, and that's how, at least that's how we project ourselves. And therefore we need to give you an education that is not just going to get you an immediately a job and a placement. Of course that will happen, but we are very confident that we can make you empower you or equip you with whatever it is required that will come in handy in the next 40-50 years. So again, if I go back to my own education, so I studied at School of Architecture, Ahmedabad. It's a very, very prestigious institution then, and even now is one of the best in the world. And there were a lot of things that our teachers told us that went sar ke upar, totally. Malab, remotely, we didn't know what they were talking about. But nevertheless, we listened in awe because they were great people and they were very accomplished people. And so we listened and we trusted that, okay, someday we shall understand. And you won't believe it. As you go along in practice, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, now we begin to understand, and it is such a high that we feel. It's like, it's a eureka moment. Say, oh my God, this is what they meant. But if they hadn't told us then, we would never have even had that eureka moment. Now we would not have the applicability of that amazing learning even when we are at this age. So sometimes we have to look at what is it that we give you that is really very, very far fetched in terms of the time period when you can apply things. And the only thing we ask in return is, please trust us and we will get you there for the next 50 years. And that's how we look at a time period of the validity of our education. And
Ma'am,
yes,
ma'am, how are you going to create an education that has value of 40 to 50 years? Because basically, let's say we're learning a weaving method. In the next 5 to 6 years, there is another machine which is doing things very differently.
Right. So
than
I
that
was
method.
exactly getting there as to what is it that is the core of that lasting, and as a lasting, what do you say, time or shelf life for 40-50 years. So that exactly, and the world is evolving at an unprecedented pace. See, it has always been evolving, but in the last century and then in the new millennium, the speed at which it is evolving is like crazy. I mean, it's really scaring humanity itself. And this is because technology is getting upgraded and in a way that it's going in leaps and bounds. So Pally, let's say you, and therefore because of technology, the mechanisms, like the person rightly pointed out, keeps changing. So I'll take a very simple example of cooking. Pally, we used to make it on a chula with firewood. Then we went to suddenly evolved and became we had LPG. Then we have piped gas line. Then you have electric mechanisms. You have an OTG and an induction, and now you have something called air fryers, and maybe someday we're going to pop pills and we don't have to cook at all. So what does that tell you? It tells you that anything that is related to a current state of technology, an understanding of a way to do things, a mechanism to do things, which is a very skill-based thing, is pretty much transient. And therefore, if I, if I project it onto something like a software, okay, I can really master a software, but by the time I start applying it, the software is changed and this one is totally defunct. So then what do I do? Again, I have to learn. So we feel that skill-based, mechanism-based learning is essentially self-audited. What we need to give is first principles, fundamentals. And these are the things that never change. And even if they change, there may be versions of it, but in principle, things don't change. And also, how does one correlate a process to, an end deliverable? A design method, a design approach, a design process. How does one think when you're given a problem? How do you manipulate your self and your thinking to reach a solution? So these are some of the things that kind of we focus on. And of course, design is about intuition, but it's also hugely about building an argument on why do you design what you design. And that is the fundamental difference between art and design. Art has a purpose. Design has a utilitarian function. That means people use design for performing human activities. And therefore, the responsibility of a designer is more than a responsibility of an artist. So maybe you are also an artist, but then you have much more you have to think about. So in order to be able to do this continuously in this changing scenario, what are those ingredients you need that, even if the recipe changes and the product changes, you still get the flavor of life. And that's what we are going to fundamentally be teaching you for the next 4 years. And it's all about a process of thinking. How do you think
basically you're
critically?
teaching us adaptability.
May I know who this is? What's your name? Okay. Are you an aspirant or are you a student or are you?
Yes, ma'am, I'm a student and I'm applying for design village.
So yes, so of course it's about adaptability, but adaptability of what? Okay, I'll throw the question back to you. When you say adaptability, what am I adapting?
I'm adapting to different kinds of technologies that will come over the years, or adapting to different kind of methods for production and for designing also that might come over the years.
Yes.
So the basic fundamentals of designing you're talking about is basically how it can be useful to others and how it can integrate our ideas and ideals.
Yeah, precisely. So that's what I'm saying. The how to do might change. The what to do also might change because people's needs and wants are also changing. As in how we are evolving, our needs are different, our wants are different. Difference between a need and a want, right? So when there is so much flux, what is it that can help us to anchor ourselves and keep ourselves rooted, that okay, this is the starting point, and then like you say, adaptive flexibility and going with the flow, all these things of course come into picture. So how do you analyze things? How do you draw inferences? How do you look at many different ways of looking at things? Then how do you take a position on the one perspective that you have opted to address? These are the kind of learnings that you will have at TDV, and therefore the entrance exam also looks at that. So for us, it's not just a job. It's not something where, okay, I have this package this year, I get an increment. Of course, money is important. There is nothing, there's no doubt in that. There is no debate. Now, this is a small page I found from a diary. My son he was in class 9. And after he left our home for studying somewhere else. I found his diary, and to me, it really is one of the most precious things that I have of him. And he's embarrassed that I show it to people in my different presentations. But I think this is what we want to inculcate in you, is that what is your calling in life? And I remember even as a young teenager, a star-struck teenager, lots of crazy ideas. I always had this calling in life that I have to do something in the domain of space, because somehow working in the domain of space was when I felt completely liberated and completely exhilarated, that this is the best thing that's happening to me. So understand your calling in life and try to articulate it, but do it in a way that it has all these ingredients. It should be what you love doing, what you're good at, what you get paid for, most important, and even more important is what the world needs. So I can go on making something which, if I don't have any takers for it, well, what am I going to do? It's just going to remain on paper. Similarly, I may be very good at it, but if nobody is paying me for it, then I might as well do charity. It's not a profession. So I think we try to somehow get students to begin to identify with what their possible callings in life could be, so that by the time they settle down and they have a practice and then they evolve in the practice, somehow that calling in life gets articulated, and then at some point in time you are there doing exactly what you wanted to do. Yeah, so that is one thing. Then sorry, what does not change are values. So what are these values? I think we put a lot of importance to values in design in TDV. So in a few slides ahead, we will see how people have done it, and people who are not only faculty, but also people who we really look up to understand, okay, you've set the benchmark, now we want to reach there. So those values is what defines, our brand. So I believe I'm a brand. And if I'm talking sustainable design, I'm living sustainable design. That's my brand. And I don't just talk about it, I live those values, and that is what constitutes my brand. People who know me, they know that I do not buy clothes unless I absolutely, they look shabby and they have completely outlived, and then I still try to do something else with it. I do not have plastic in my house. And then it is so easy for me and so convincing for me to be able to talk about the evils of plastic. So I think that is something that we need to build, and that doesn't change over a time. What values I hold important to my life and what I think the world needs doesn't change, irrespective of, if it means making the world a better place, then that might be adapted to situations, but fundamentals never change. Then I want to be able to take a position, like I said. So a position is like a statement of a worldview. Okay, so if I have if I read a lot, it's not just about what I read, but how I interpret it, what I make of it, and how I'm going to apply that interpretation or my understanding to a problem at hand. And that is very important. So there's this famous architect called Corbusier. He designed the city of Chandigarh, the French architect. So he he operated in the time when the automobiles were really developing at a very fast pace, and it was the automobile age. And so he made this very famous statement saying, every house is a machine to live in. Now, that's what I mean by a position. Now, the stand that he took, that houses and buildings are machines, and of course, he has validated it through his theory. That's a position that is reflected in all his projects, irrespective of whether it's a house, it's a hospital, it's a city, at any scale, any typology. That position is a reflection of how you see the world, and you apply that in all your work, and that gives you your value, and that gives you also your brand. So we see your potential in these kind of things. So right now we don't have to give you world changing events, but if I just ask you in the interview, you have a puja at home, and mom needs your help, and there is the college fest, and you obviously can't be in two places at the same time. Which of the two places would you like to be? See, dilemma. I want to have the cake and eat it too, but I can't. So then in such a situation, what is the position I would take? So I've had students who said, no, mom is my life, fests come and go. There's no way that I'm going to let her down. There's another one who says, it's my life, I'm an adult, these pujas never end and my mom understands, so I am going to go to the fest. So for us, it's not about judging which is right and wrong. It's about how you are able to defend and build an argument as to, if you have taken a stand, how to do that. Because as designers in education and as designers in practice, you have to be able to take a stand. And many times when the stakeholders are many, you will always have conflicting positions, and then you will have to be the one who say yes. And at that point, you will have to weigh the pros and cons and then be able to give a reason as to why you took a particular stand. So we see your potential for this. And then what are these values? I mean, or attributes, and what are these purposes? So just to give you an example of, I think it was in 2016, we had something called a Bauhaus Masterclass, a very successful a 4-month-long workshop at TDV. TDV was just 1 year old at that time, or maybe 2 years old, and we had 10 students from the Bauhaus School of Design, Dessau. It's a very famous school. It's the first modern multidisciplinary industry-centric school of design that was set up in 1919. And in 2019, many of us went to Germany to see what had happened after 100 years, or in the 100 years, to the school of thought. So we had this program with 10 students from there and 10 students from TDV, and they did this amazing workshop. So Arjun Sara was one of my students, and he came to do this workshop and look at his statement of purpose. So one of the things that you will do is to write a statement of purpose as to why do you want to belong in TDV? What do you think of TDV? What kind of values would you bring with you? What would be your takeaway? What do you see yourself like 40 years down the line? Things like that. And he was so honest. He said that, I asked him, I said, why would you be in administrative services? He said, well, I really like to design for people. And I find that actually in administrative services, in any capacity, your basic responsibility is to be able to work for people. So working for people, the design thing is always with me. So eventually I like to work with people. But he also was very honest and said, but I'm a gambler. And I said, hey, come on, we're also gambling here, because you were really young at that time. So I think in our statement of purpose, be very honest. Tell us who you really are, why design is a calling in life for you. And it's also good to be able to articulate, how do you see yourself, making this world a better place, not only for you, but also for others. And I think that's why I put this slide, to just tell you to refer to the statement of purpose as something which, we really read carefully, and we form our first impressions, and we also things which we like, or things which we feel we can then mold in the 4 years, we pick on that, and then we nurture it. So do take that portion really seriously. Then I want to ask you another question. So you say, you want to be a designer. Suppose I ask you to add an adjective before designer. Can you just, as of now, of course things will change, but now can you just tell me what kind of a designer would you like to be? Yes, we have a fairly good crowd. I mean, I want to have answers popping words, like, only 3-4 people are talking. And when you join TDV, only these 3 we will believe that 18 log bolenge. So you don't want that opinion, right? So change, prove me wrong. Yes. Yes. Pardon?
I'd like to be a designer who solves problems and is known for solving problems. Like it should be like something decorative is also design, but something that solves a very big problem at the same time in a simple way.
Okay, so you want to be a problem-solving designer. Great, wonderful. Who else?
A contented designer.
A contented designer. How sweet. So when you say contented, like, well, how would you define contentment?
Ma'am, satisfaction.
You want to be a a designer who is satisfied with the work that you do, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So you want to be satisfied, or you want your users to be satisfied?
Both.
So you want to be a responsive designer. You want to be able to respond to people's needs in a way that they're happy with your work. Yeah, that's a very, very valid. In fact, that is the least that we can do. Definitely. Absolutely. Anyone else?
A self-reliant design.
A self-reliant designer. Okay, great. So again, thoda sa explain.
Ma'am, I mean, I should not, I would like to hear everyone's thoughts, but ma'am, I would not like to put it like a pressure that I have to do like this only. I will put my thoughts first and would like to do.
Okay, so you want to be original, or you want to be an independent thinking designer? Great.
Original.
Yes. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes,
I
sir.
want to be an exemplary designer, like to be remembered, someone who inspired a lot of people.
Great. Absolutely. Somebody's raised a hand. Yes. Somebody says famous. Great. Of course. Want to be famous. Sure. Then?
Ma'am, I want to be a designer. Like, I want to do work that is like has more of recycled stuff and not new resources are exploited for the same.
Okay.
And it's a lot of like towards the environment for the better cause.
So you want to be a sustainable designer?
Yes, ma'am, we can say
Great.
that.
Yes. I want you guys to go back and put this up on your pin boards, okay? And never forget it.
Ma'am, Lakshita also wanted to ask something. She's raising her hand.
Yes, yes, please go ahead.
Ma'am, I do not want to ask something. Actually, I was adding an adjective like I want to be a unique and a busy designer. Because my definition for success is not only having money and just being myself, but maybe after 40 to 50 years, I want to be busy. Like any Monday I wake up and I'm still planning my schedule. I have not just stopped my life at that time.
Yeah. So it's a very interesting point that you're raising, is that you're absolutely right. This gaadi hai, bangla hai, maa bhi hai comes. Yeah, it comes pretty fast. And so with that status bhi aata hai. So I used to ask my architecture students ki architecture mein kyun aaye, and the typical answer used to be, I want to make a lot of money. I say, okay, I'm telling you, by 30 you'll make a lot of money. Actually, that's not true, but anyway. Then what will you do? Well, I'll buy a new car, I'll buy a new house. I say, okay, then what? Status. So then I say, well, status comes with money now. वो तो automatically पीछे पीछे आएगा. Because it's not like Gandhiji did not have money, but Gandhiji had status. So it's not about character anymore. It really comes with money and affluence. So then what will you do? Then I say, we want to go on a world cruise. Very cute answer. So then, I used to tell them, see, the problem is that these things, when you achieve now, then what will you do? Because you still have another 30, 40 years. It's not that difficult to be monetarily or materialistically successful, especially if your needs are decent. I mean, and you will always have money. So then what will you do? Then you'll get bored. Then you go to depression, right? And then I don't know what you'll do. So meaning to say that you must have a mission or a purpose in life that is so huge that, like you said, every Monday morning, you are running, and you have so much to do that even 7 lifetimes are not enough. That is exactly what I mean by having a calling in life and having a mission or a purpose, which goes way beyond having a success in terms of a materialistic life, which is fair. I mean, it's good to have that. It's just that you should not stop at that. You should have something much more to do, because we have the power to do that. That's the best part. All of us have it. And as designers, I think there is a lot that, especially in India, we are still not doing. If you look around you, you will find that there isn't much value for design in India. There isn't that culture of design, that understanding of what design can do. And we are to blame for it. We have not created that kind of place in the hearts of ordinary people and the masses and the populace about what we can do with design. So I think your generation really needs to work on that. Thank you so much for sharing this. Okay, so if I'll go ahead. So again, I want to be what kind of a designer? So lot of things will come. So we sort of wrap up all these into one very, very important word, which is responsible design. And with responsible, if you change the word, it's a responsive designer. That means you respond to a need and you do your bit to address that need. So that is also done in a way that you are able to deliver, and not just for the sake of delivering, but then you've done something where it has really made people happy. So that's what another person shared. I'm so glad that many of these prolific designers, somebody said, I want to be very busy. Somebody said, I want to be very impactful. I want to have a work that people will notice me. And it's not really so much about noticing me, but it's about noticing me as a designer who really did so much for the world, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now the question is, what do we mean by a responsible designer? So if we are, we come up with a tagline, we want to make responsible designers, then we also need to tell people how do we go about it. So who is a responsible designer? So I'll just run through it. Of course, a responsible designer will do everything in his or her or their power to not do harm. And I got these statistics. I kept going back to several websites. Is this figure for real? Because it seems absurd. But yes, in a particular, time in the 70s, when there was just so much of production happening that people just wanted to be, it was kind of the peak of the consumeristic culture, and it was done at a cost that is unimaginable. So a responsible designer, of course, never does harm. On the contrary, is one who wants to do good. But good where is the big question. So our partners are a Technical University Delft. Delft is an academic village or a town in Holland, in the Netherlands, and they have been guiding us from the beginning. And actually, the government of India asked the government of Holland to suggest a mechanism by which a design school which would meet the challenges of the 21st century be set up in India. And the Dutch government sent the Dutch professors to interact with different people here. And that is when, our team of our management and our some of us who were there in the beginning got in touch with these Dutch professors. And that's how we have been a very, very important part of the country's dream of what should be a dream school and what should be a dream designer for the 21st century in India. So the TU Delft students designed this drone. And the logic is that even in a country like Holland, where you have a dedicated road for emergency services, it still takes 3 minutes for an ambulance to arrive anywhere. Amazing, 3 minutes. For us, it's probably 3 hours. But even 3 minutes to the Dutch was not acceptable, because a heart attack patient may not have time, to survive it if he or she doesn't get help within. So it had to be reduced to 1 minute. So they designed this drone. These drones are positioned at respective distances, and they can reach then any point in that circumference that they are allotted within 1 minute. So it comes to you wherever you are the moment you call them, and it's on a speed dial, and it kind of opens up because it reaches in 1 minute, because it goes as the crow flies. Yeah, it doesn't have to take a road where there might be a red light. Even if that red light has to be beaten, it still has to go a longer path. But the drone goes straight and it opens up. There is a CPR machine. There is a doctor who comes and tells you how to perform CPR. And they found that they were able to save many, many more lives than ever before. And this was designed by the students of Technical University Delft Industrial Design Department. So design has now moved into every realm of society: healthcare, hygiene, sanitation, water supply, you name it. I mean, well-being, conflict, everything, management, of course. And that is the amazing part, that we have so much now work to do, so many more responsibilities. So I think this is one of my favorite examples. And I have been to Delft and I've seen this is in operation. And it's an amazingly, high moment to see that it actually is something that design has done to save lives. So there can be nothing better than saving lives, right? Then a good designer is, of course, like somebody said, would like to make have a satisfied client and also be satisfied with one's own, and you are always critical of yourself. So you want to set a high benchmark. But the nicest thing is that clients, typically they come to you asking for conveniences and facilities. Yeah. So if I'm an architect, they come to me saying, I want 2 bedrooms, one with attached toilet, one with walk-in closet. I want car park for 4 cars. So these are conveniences. But of course, we have to give them, you can't say, sorry, please sell your car and travel by metro. It's our job to give the client what he or she wants. Okay. Because that's why they've come to you. And most of the times they're legitimate requirements. Because they want to have a house or a hospital or whatever is it, it is that must resolve its function. But our job is also to transcend that and give them experiences. So my classic example would be to give a beautiful corner to Dadaji, where in the morning the east light comes in, streams through, maybe a pergola or a set of louvers, and the muted light is where Dadaji reads his newspaper every morning and, is given that mandatory cup of tea. And the beauty of this is that someday when Dadaji is no more, you will always remember that corner, and the memories of Dadaji will never go away. That is the power of space making. And it is for us designers to understand that we need to give people much more than what they ever imagined they needed. And that is another high. So at TDB, we always set the bar at, okay, the client came with this brief, they just wanted this much. But hey, can we give them more than that? Can we give them something they didn't know? I didn't know I wanted this, but now that you've told me, of course I want it, and I want it badly. Because we have the vision to see now what they could also need, what they could also enjoy, what they could also value. So we give it to them even if they don't ask for it. And then, of course, you have to also think about what kind of impact it has on the environment. So this is actually a picture of the CEPT campus, the School of Architecture campus. So of course it was a School of Architecture, and it had classrooms and library and admin and everything. But I always tell people that the 5-6 years that we spent there, it was a long graduation. The building was a teacher in itself. The building was always in conversation, or we were always looking at the building. We were looking at the material. We were looking at the lighting. We were looking at the textures of the material, the colors. We were looking at how two materials are coexisting. We were looking at form. We were looking at structure. We were looking at light. All the principles that we learned by sketching on paper, or what our teacher taught us on the board, we were experiencing it in the building. And clearly the person who designed this had foreseen the need for students of architecture to be able to converse with the building. So again, he had given us much more than what we were expecting from an architecture school, which was maybe classrooms, great teachers. But this is what we got. And of course, we had great teachers and great classrooms. Then it's also about thinking of the big picture. So I'll give an example of a doctor. A doctor, you go to a doctor, you say, I have a bad throat. He gives you an antibiotic, and voila, the throat is better the next day. You're happy, doctor got his fees, all hunky-dory. But a doctor is a professional. He needs or she needs to understand that if I unnecessarily prescribe antibiotics, it's possible that this antibiotic resistant superbug might attack an entire population. So a responsible designer weighs a decision made in the interest of a client vis-a-vis the impact on everybody other than anything and everything other than the client himself or herself. So that could be the environment, the physical environment, other living species, other human beings, communities, society, whatever. So I think these are the things what a responsible designer must have as a kind of a checklist. And this is what we inculcate at TDB. And this is what we also begin to look for in chote gestures as to how responsible are you, and how do you understand that the power that, what comes with power is actually great responsibility. Okay. So this is a brand called Freitag. I own a Freitag bag. It's a Swiss brand, and I was studying in Switzerland, and I could ill afford it, but I just wanted it because I just love their idea. They take these tarpaulin covers of trucks after, they're worn out, and then they convert them into this amazing repertoire of bags, wallets, mobile covers, what do you call, suitcases, and all kinds of baggage holding equipment. And their designs are stunning. But what I love about them is that they took a material that was a absolute hazard. They prolonged its shelf life, and they actually created something of value, of a certain kind of what do you say, aspiration, and therefore gave it a sustainability quotient. So someday you might throw the bag, but the point is that, at least you are prolonging the life, and that way probably you are reducing the burden on the physical condition of the earth, so that it has time to heal. So I think that is again what so basically it's not about what design is, but what design does. So it's a proactive word. Responsibility is not about talking. It's about doing something, and doing it in a particular way that, all these paradigms are followed. And this is what we're looking for. Then what we look for in students is the potential, chuttu sa potential, for what we call as the 4 attributes or values that we constantly nurture in TDV. And also our evaluation processes after you enter TDV are also based on these 4, what we call as the pillars. So awareness is one of them, and awareness is probably the starting, and it leads on to the other attributes or values. And what is awareness? It's, like I said, not knowledge. It's about knowing what is happening and to be able to process it by your own mechanism of processing, and to have a stand on it, and also then eventually take action. So a beautiful example would be the concept of a conflict kitchen in the United States. Now, the conflict kitchen was started by 2 people who realized that, when first of all, United States is always at war with some country or the other, and it just creates a lot of tension for the people of that country who happen to have migrated to United States. So if it's at war with Iran, the Iranians living in America are very uncomfortable. Yeah, of course. So they started with this idea that, okay, let the governments fight over oil or whatever it is they're fighting for. Why don't we just ordinary people have mechanisms to at least understand where we stand on these issues, and whether we really agree with those governments fighting, or we are actually just happy with living a peaceful and a contented life. So conflict kitchen only serves food from countries with which the United States is presently at war. And so people of that community come here, they probably cook, they are there, they eat there, and then obviously the people from the local population comes there. So they could be other fellow Americans, who could be Americans, Hispanics, or Afro-Americans, all kinds of people. And you start a conversation over food. It's a very specific example of how an awareness of conflict and the negativity that conflict creates can be resolved with chotu gestures, and small gestures can indeed have big impacts. So awareness is one of them. So in one of your questions, if you have a mock paper, or you will get a mock paper, one of the questions is, how do you see your city? Yeah, from your perspective, that's the question, right? I'm having a tab that is getting... what is the question? Can somebody read it for me? Because I'm getting it's not visible on my screen.
Ma'am, I can read it.
Yeah, please do.
How do you see your city? Share 5 completely different.
Right. So it's like a quiz. Okay. So again, I don't want to ask you who built the Taj Mahal, where is the Taj Mahal, because you can get that. I want you to be able to look at things which you already know, but in a way that you have processed it, and processed it from your perspective, and you've presented it in a way that you want to. Right. So a typical question like this might seem easy, but to be very honest, what we are looking at is your ability to see through things. All right. So let's say if I were to answer this question, for instance, I would say, well, Delhi being, and I'm not a Delhiite, I got married, and well, I chose the boy. So Delhi came as a package, like how the family comes as a package. And I just, whether I like it or not, I had to accept it. So I'm not very comfortable in Delhi. So obviously my perspective would be based on my conditioning, which is 1, not a Delhiite, 2, not particularly very, not a favorite city, but 3, having to majboori stay here. And 4, found ways in 26 years to not only reconcile to it, but actually look at some positive things, but very critically. So I'd say Delhi being the capital city is always about power. And somehow it's not just political, it is also economic. The broad tree-lined boulevards and the monumental British era buildings, particularly in Lutyens Delhi, which is central Delhi, were designed to demonstrate this aura of a capital. And British chale gaye, but wo that mentality chhod gaye. Now the attitude of people, which is now becoming very unpopular and is commonly leading to road rages. Do you know who I am? Do you know who my father is? Okay. Delhi is also metaphorically a capital because it's largely made up of a migrant population from all parts of India. Okay. And they often reside in specific pockets and they have a micro identity. And these spaces, these pockets become a sort of cultural hubs. They become places where specific community or related festivals or that region related festivals are held. You get all the food and the ingredients and the cuisine, and you have cultural institutions. Typically, you find people speaking a common language in that region. There'll be artifacts that are visible and so on and so forth. So this would be how I would answer this question. So what seems like a very quiz kind of question, ki meko 5 cheezein bata Delhi mein, is actually not so simple, but it's also your chance to tell us what you think of your city. So you will have a question like this, which will tell us, are you able to analyze what is happening around you? And your city means it's something that you're familiar with, right? Nobody's asking you to tell us something about, let's say, Israel. Not yet. Let's understand our own context first. Okay, cool. Then our second value system is courage. And what courage? Not bungee jumping courage, not paragliding or something like that. Not that daredevil wala courage, but the ability to take calculated risks, to be able to take a bold stand. And oftentimes the stand has to be taken when issues are very complex. They may be very controversial, they may be very sensitive. So you have to tread very carefully. They may be related to the most burning issues on earth. So you have to be able to take a stand. And in this, again, I go back to TU Delft. They have an amazing lab or an entire department, which is called Design for Values. And we have so many of the people from the Design for Values who come and teach us. They do master classes for faculty, for students. They take workshops. And of course, they've opened the entire of the Delft University for us, right? So again, another question of taking a position or a stand would be also reflective of one more paradigm that we follow, which is compassion. When you sympathize with people, you say, oh my God, so bad, bahut bura hua. That is sympathy. Empathy is when you are able to put yourself in the shoes of the person and almost feel what that person is feeling. And empathy is extremely important for design, because if you're not a compassionate designer, well, I don't think that you will really create that impact. And especially when you're dealing with marginalized communities, you are looking at communities that don't have a voice, communities who are exploited, communities who are differently abled. I think the empathy factor becomes an overriding and everything else becomes secondary. So that's why the question that we want you to take a stand, and that would reflect a courage, a courageous stand, your awareness of a situation that is currently happening in the world, as well as your ability to empathize with somebody, would be a question like this. And it's a reality. You see, there are all these kirana shops, small grocery shops are all suffering because of the mall culture and the convenience stores. And these now you have these Amazon walk-in stores where you don't even have to carry a wallet. You just have to have your phone. So people don't even need to be employed to help you pick things or be there while you're billing. You can just walk in and walk out, and well, the money is just taken from your bank account. Wow. And what cost is this convenience coming? It's going to deprive a whole lot of people who are employed in a convenience store. That's another thing, that a convenience store itself has taken away a lot of your, neighborhood locality shops. So to be able to understand that, yes, I'm also buying clothes online. I'm buying things online. Have I ever thought about what it does to people who, who don't manage to sell a single dress because nobody walked into their shop? So if you imagine yourself in that position, how would you deal with it is again, it's a question of a dilemma kind of a thing. And it puts you in a position where you have to be able to decide what is it that you're going to do and defend it with an argument. Okay. So Ninke, for instance, is again a masterclass. She's right now with some of her faculty who are traveling to Amsterdam from Technical University Delft. And you should listen to this TEDx talk. It's called Design in Democracy. Now, this for me goes for awareness, it goes for courage. For me, it goes for perseverance, which is another pillar, and it goes for compassion. Now, she says that in a democracy, there are two parties. Yeah, are we running short of time? Okay, another 5 minutes. There is the voter and there is the representative. The voter typically, puts all the blame if things are not done on the representative and says, okay, we didn't do his job or didn't do her job, and forgets his or her own responsibility in having voted very carefully, because we don't vote carefully. So she said, okay, if this was a design problem and we were to understand an election and what an election does and how important it is for the voter and the voted to actually be engaged and to do their respective jobs, let's find a design intervention. So she came up with a single tagline, and this has been adopted in a country like Iceland, although probably not so easy to manifest in a big country like India, but great idea. She said, what if everybody votes on their birthday? Bombastic statement. What are the implications of everybody working on their birthday? Have I frozen?
No.
You can. Just a second. There's an outreach call. I'll just take it. Maybe she's trying to tell me something. Right. Now, Marike is, so if you vote on your birthday, what happens is you're going to vote 4 times, because typically elections happen 4 times. Let's assume you're going to vote 4 times. So that representative is going to get your vote 4 times, not once. Okay. So it's not that from cycle to cycle, he can sleep and he can just wake up just when it's election time and then suddenly say, hey, I'm going to do this and that for you. Every year you're going to vote. Okay. Secondly, because you're voting on your birthday, which is a very special day for most of us, we're not going to take it lightly. We're going to put some attention to it. Okay. 9 out of 10 people are quite concerned about their birthdays, or maybe 8 out of 10, but people are. And then you imagine any day on any given day, it'll be somebody's birthday in a country. Of course, there'll be so many people who are going to have a birthday on a particular day, right? In a population of several million. It means that the representative is going to get a vote every day. So can you imagine what kind of complacency he or she can even think of having? Matlab hi nahi hai. I don't want to use crass language, but it was really going to be like on his tenterhooks and who have to deliver his job or her job. And this came out of an understanding that we need to look at democracy differently. We need to look at the problems that democracy has as our problems as designers and see whether we can do something about it. And then I met Ninke last year and I asked her, I said, Ninke, has this been applied? Because it's so good. She said, yes, first of all, our job is to give awareness and to offer solutions. Then it's for somebody else to take over. Okay. Of course, we can't alone single-handedly save the world. So yes, it was not picked by the government of Netherlands because it was seen as a very simplified solution for an election at a larger level. But she says it is definitely applicable at local elections where you are voting for your mayor or your MLA or whatever. And Iceland, because it's a country that has a smaller population, is actually enforcing this. So it's to me, it's a great understanding of what design can do. Then we have Marike. Now, Marike is also from Technical University Delft, a great friend of mine. Now, after a personal experience, she realized that people who are on their deathbed are extremely afraid of death. They are miserable. They have a lot of anxiety, and whatever time they really have to live is not a happy one. So she has started this entire laboratory called Design for End of Life. She comes to TDV every year. Only she didn't come last year because of the pandemic. And she does this exercise with students. And believe me, at the end of that 1 week of a workshop, kids are weeping. But then they say that they have changed forever. Yeah, because they have entered a domain which is very, very, it's an uneasy domain. It's not something you want to get into, and you are feeling very, very want to put it off, that, well, I hope it never happens in my life. But then she has the courage to say, no, we need to put all these silly kind of emotions aside, and we need to understand that as designers there is so much we can do, and there is so much of happiness that you can give those people, and therefore be happy yourself. So it's not as if you're going to have to only be anxious, but when you learn to deal with it and you are able to give them that happiness, it actually is going to enrich your life in a positive way. And well, Marie-Kay has also changed a lot, many of us personally as human beings, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to listen to her and to work with her. Then we have perseverance. Perseverance means the ability to see a project. You don't quit, you don't give up, you don't also leave it where it is just because it's good the way it is. You try to make it better and better and better and better. You work out all the little details, and that requires a rigor, a discipline, and a persistent, dogged persistence to continue to do that, even though it might be difficult, it might be full of failings, it might be full of obstacles. And I think perseverance is again a very, very key agenda for us. So we're looking at the potential for a couple of things. We're looking at your 4 key values, which is awareness, perseverance, compassion or empathy, and courage. And broadly, we are also looking at storytelling. Why did I put this picture? If you remember Panchatantra, Aesop fables, Hans Christian Andersen, any of these Jataka tales, what was the moral of that story? The moral used to be very simple. Don't cheat, don't be greedy, don't make fun of others, don't think you are the only smart person on earth. Okay, so these were all preachings, right? They were morals, they were values. But they were always told in this, once upon a time, there was a village and there were people and there was this lion and there was this dog. And so what happens is this whole idea of narrative is inculcated so that you remember. If mom every day kept telling you as a child, be honest, don't lie, tell the truth, do this, do that, don't do that, you would be like telling her, I want to run away. But then she sugarcoated it with all these beautiful stories and these characters. And at the end of the day, what you eventually learned out of it was that you should not lie. You should, all these things. So narrative, how do you tell a story? How do you pitch something is also an art. And for a designer, that communication is very important. How do you connect with your audience? How do you, so of course, you're going to learn these things. But we are just looking at, do you have that little X factor? So work a little bit on saying things in a better way, in a more interesting way. So I write a lot. And all my writing is, of course, about informing people about something. Okay, it's design writing. But it doesn't stop at informing. I always set myself the target, which I have not probably achieved yet, but I'm striving for it, is I want to inspire people. I want to influence people. But right now, I know where I have definitely reached is my writing is already identified. It is seen as, Acha, Leena ji, did you write this article in this magazine? I say yes, but I didn't put my name there. I said, but I knew it is yours. And it gives me a very warm kind of oozy feeling that, oh my God, my writing is identified. And then I say, like, why is it that you identify? I said, no, it's very interesting. You are bordering sarcasm, but then you are also, you're not being hoity-toity, but you're being kind of, borderline satire. So that's a style. And that is what I mean, a storytelling and a mechanism to retain something that has been told for a much longer period of time, a recall value. Yeah. So that's again something that you could look at. And last, but not the least, we do look at skill, drawing skill, representation skill. What kind of process did you follow? So we will ask you in the interview, okay, this was the problem that was given to you. Okay, how did you start? Then what did you do? Then what happened? What were the problems you encountered? How did you work your way around? So that's why I put these images from a book that I once went through. So visual representation skills, of course, they matter. It's not as if we are totally trivializing them or we are saying that not necessary, but always remember that they don't have to be artistic sketches. So if those of you who have a flair for sketching, you will get brownie points if you make, because yes, it's something that leaves an impression. It's like a good handwriting, yeah. But in a good handwriting in a board exam, the examiner might just be so floored, give you 5 marks. We might not do that. We might just appreciate. We will give you marks for the quality of the design and the idea. But a representation skill is always welcome. And if you don't have the flair, you don't have to worry, because in design, a sketching skill is a tool. It's not a hobby like you're a doctor, but you like to paint, or it's not like your livelihood depends on sketching like you are a fine art person. Yeah, it's somewhere in between. And of course, processes, we like kids to have their own processes. Yeah, we all have our jugaad, right? We know that by hook or crook, I got to reach there. So it's interesting to see how different people have different ways of approaching the same problem. And it's again, it's a reflection of your conditioning, your personality, your basic, mindset. And we love it that we have so many different kind of people thinking differently and adding value to each other's processes in design. And I think process matters a lot, especially in design education. We in practice, it is important, but it may not be something that is given great value by a client. The client looks at the end product. But during the education process, we look at how did you reach there rather than where did you reach. Yeah. So that's why we also look at a little bit of that process. So I think that is it. And then going back to, okay, whatever you do, you should know why you do what you do. And that is a thumb rule to be a good designer. Yeah, to be a responsible designer. Always have a reason for doing things. Okay, don't just do things because I felt like it. I mean, in the sense, if you're doing it like I want to eat pizza today, I felt like it is different. But if I have designed this pizza, then I should know why I have designed this pizza the way I have designed, right? That's it. So yeah, I guess that should be it. Yes. Thank you so much for patiently listening for an hour and 20 minutes. Thank you. Any questions? Any comments? Also welcome.
Thank you, ma'am, for this great session.
Pardon?
Thank you, ma'am, for this great session. We learned a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Ma'am, truly the session was very informative. And I think the students, you also enjoyed a lot.
I hope so. See, I wanted to go back, and maybe a lot of what I said sounded very complicated or didn't understand. So you're most welcome to continue chatting with me. You can take my number from Raman, ma'am, and you can feel free to talk to us, any of us. I could also, if I was not able to answer your question, or if I felt that a question deserves many more people to be engaged, because like I said, from today, all bacha, hamare bache. And it is independent of whether you do take admission at TDV or not. I still have a lot of people who I counseled who for some reason could not take, they had personal issues, but then there's so many things that they still ask me, and I feel very touched.
Connected to you because
very, yeah. I mean, and where did it happen? It happened in the interview. So then I realized that interview is, we had lost so much time. So that's why this time I'm opening up my time and whatever it is that I can add value to right in the beginning.
Anybody who would like to share their thoughts of the workshop, the feedback on the workshop?
Has it helped you feel better about the exam? Let me put it that way.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yes. So you also have a mock paper that you can avail. And on the day of the exam, I will also be there in person online to be able to answer any doubts and queries you have. Yeah. So you can ask any question. No question is termed a stupid question. Every question will be answered again and again. Even if people ask the same question, we still answer. We just want you to look at the challenge positively and have no negativity. It is a challenge. Believe me, the exam is a challenge.
They'll come up, ma'am, on the same day. They'll come up.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, cool. So anything else that anybody would like to? We still have quite a few students on board.
Ma'am, they're asking about your number, so I will be sharing your number.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Ma'am, you can just say your number and they'll all note.
Okay. Or do I type or something? Oh, I mean, I didn't switch on the, okay. Yeah, I generally do that. Because I feel if we are standing oh, I think it has gone only to one person.
To Naisha only. Ma'am, you just let me know, I'll give it to everybody. Or you
It's, yeah, it's 92131.
Just a second, ma'am. 92131.
98119.
Sure, ma'am. I'll send it to everybody.
Yes. And all the best. Do well in the board exams, and you can carry this spirit also to the board exam. The board exam is a strategy, okay? And even if you haven't studied so far, you just have to develop a strategy, and the board exam is a cakewalk.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye. Be seeing you.
All the best, students. Lots of love. Lots of luck. Hope you do the paper.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yep.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for your sweet and kind words.
And thank you so much, Leela ma'am, for your time.
No problem.
Yes.
Bye.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes, dear. Yes.
Ma'am, can you please type in the number in the chat box?
Just give me a minute. I'm doing that, Beta, please. I'm doing it.
Thank you.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes, dear.
Is it possible to get the recording of this session as well? It was really
Yes, I will be sharing it with Sumit sir, and he will be giving you. He has asked me for this recording. I'll give you. Okay, maybe tomorrow or
thank
day
you so
after, this recording will be there with you. Anything else?